I don't think there's a single live music page on the entire internet with as much influence and as much of an audience as NPR Tiny Desk. And the sound and engineering that you would hear in an NPR Tiny Desk show is really completely different than anything else on the internet, and I don't think those two things are a coincidence. So in this video, I'm gonna watch a handful of Tiny Desk productions and then break down how they get this really stripped down, genuine production quality out of the rig that they're using. Then we'll make our own production in the exact style of Tiny Desk and walk you through exactly how to do it in a home studio setting. All right, let's get into it. So before we even get into any live performances, check this out. This is a 360 camera inside of the Tiny Desk concert. Now, the Tiny Desk is a person's desk. This is an employee's desk that they just retrofit whenever the performances happen.
Rather than going to shows where very quiet singer-songwriters are drowned out, we could just have them perform at our desks.
So we're going to videotape this for our blog, and maybe it's the start of something and maybe it's not.
But just a quick look around here, you can see we have a huge audience all watching the show, and then we have the actual desk itself. This, in a way, is a lot like acoustic treatment. Look at how many things are behind the desk. Not only does this make a great set, but it also makes great acoustics. The more clutter and the less smooth surfaces, the better the sound is going to be. And that's because jagged, non-linear angles actually break up and disperse sound waves, so you don't get a really reflective environment. And on that note, actually all of these people in the background here all are also absorbing sound. They're actually contributing to the tone of the acoustics in this room. Now we're going to be mixing these tracks on Kali Audio IN5s. They're sponsoring this video. These monitors are objectively the best 5-inch monitors that I have ever heard, and that's because they have 3 different drivers inside of them rather than the normal 2. We'll hear more about this during the mixing stage. All right, let's start with Posty, shall we?
Couldn't turn around till we were upside down.
One thing that you really can't separate from a Tiny Desk performance, this microphone right here. It's called a Sennheiser MKH418S for stereo. This is not a typical microphone that you would see in a live session. This is actually more typical to see in TV, camera production, spoken word, broadcast. The reason why this microphone is so important is because you'll find almost all the singers are being mic'd with it, and it's a condenser microphone. Typically in live performances, we use a dynamic microphone because it rejects a lot of the noise around it. These are all world-class performers, and at the end of the day, we're recording a live session. We're not trying to make this studio ready. It's supposed to sound more genuine. Vocal bleed is okay in this scenario. This is also a 418S. That means stereo. This microphone can actually be split into 2 different signals in post, making a wider image. Here you can see a small microphone close miking Post's guitar. Every instrument has its own version of being close mic'd as well, so they can adjust the volume of the particular instruments. And then in the next shot, we see close mic microphones on the strings as well. That looks like an Earthworks microphone. One thing you'll always notice in this style of production happened in the Men I Trust video too. Drummers are typically playing a little quieter than they would normally because an acoustic kit is just so loud. They're trying not to bleed too much. I think part of the appeal of an NPR Tiny Desk show is how raw and untouched the processing is afterwards. There's no obvious mixing that's happening in post. Maybe some subtractive EQ to get rid of low end bloat, too much bass. Maybe they might tame the brightness, but it sounds super uncompressed and untouched. Even post, he's not really sitting above any of the backup singers. It gives a folky, grassroots, untouched live session, and as front facing as a production can be. All right, let's take a listen to Mac. Rest in peace, my friend.
Yeah.
One thing I'm noticing right away from this performance that's worth talking about, they're panning this like you would see this in the actual performance. The drums, normally in the center of the image, is in the left side of the image because the drummer in the video is on the left side. You hear the same thing with Thundercat's bass. He's left of center. Guitarist, far right because the guitarist is on the right. Listen to this whole interaction.
Mind my business, why you tripping? Give you something that your eyes can witness. Ooh, you're too close. I don't understand why you're doing the most. You can love it, you can leave it.
Hear that woo in the background? This is what I'm getting at. This is one thing, okay, I'm gonna have a little rant for a second because I think it's good for people to hear. So many times we think of mixing as kind of a scientific, methodological thing, right? It's a means to get to an end. Guess what, guys? Tech and production is part of the magic. And NPR Tiny Desk is a wonderful example of that. Because that whole interaction, that woo that you got from Mac, that space that he gave for the drummer to slam on that hi-hat, and then a fill from Thundercat, and then the audience bleeding into the interaction, that's happening because of this room setup. It's happening because like 50% of this tone is that condenser right in the center there, and a stereo spread that allows the room to be part of the performance. These are emotional decisions just as much as they are tech and production decisions. Okay, so let's review so that we can make this sort of setup ourselves. Tiny Desk uses hyper-directional condenser microphones to mic a space more than they're miking individual instruments. Yes, all of these microphones are pointed towards the backup singer, the acoustic guitar, and of course the main vocalist like Caroline here. But they're stereo microphones, so you can split them apart to get a wider image, therefore picking up a wider space. Then all of the other instruments are directly mic'd, whether it's a clip-on microphone on that guitar, whether it's a small diaphragm condenser on the drums. They use a stereo pair of Sennheisers to mic that upright piano. Bass is almost always a direct out. All of these are being individually mic'd. They mentioned that they use these close miking techniques in order to bring out and accent an instrument rather than being the main microphone for that instrument. But all of the individually mic'd instruments are subservient to the room sounds that we're getting with all of these Sennheiser MKH 418S's. And then as far as mixing goes, if there's any production happening here, it seems to be all subtractive. If something is getting in the way of something else, like there's too much bass in the kick, maybe strings or a synth pad are so bright that they're getting in the way of the vocal, those might be darkened, those might be brightened, but it's all to accomplish a neutral, uncompressed, very untampered with production sound. So now let's build an NPR Tiny Desk in our bedroom. So I have a really cool announcement. I'm actually taking on clients. I've basically spent the last 2 years building this YouTube channel so I can have a foundational income in order to support taking on client work. So I've built a website, it's linked in the description, and on that website you can submit a link to your demo. For now, I'm only gonna take on 2 clients at a time. I wanna make sure that enough time and enough effort is spent to every single one of my artists. I am also primarily looking for artists in New York City. I just feel like creatively it's much more productive to work in person. So if that sounds like you and you're interested, feel free to submit a demo using the website down below. Now back to NPR. All right, so we are using a shotgun microphone today because I wanted to do like a little NPR vibe. So it's been a couple weeks since recording that first part of the video, and the actual Tiny Desk recreation is done. And we're gonna go over everything I did, what worked, what didn't work, and how you should approach both production and mixing. So first things first, check out the actual environment that we recorded this in. It's a cozy little Brooklyn apartment near Prospect Park, and as you can see, the space itself has a lot of things in it. It's kind of cluttered, there's not a lot of flat surfaces, so we're gonna avoid a lot of room reflections. Now this session was incredibly intense. Let's go over all of the different inputs that we're working with. We have 3 different microphones on the kit. We have a Sennheiser E609 on the actual kick, a Neumann MCM 114 on the snare, and then a Sennheiser MK4 as a single mono overhead over the cymbal and the hi-hat. We're gonna put some cheaper options on the screen because I know these can be kind of pricey. And if you happen to go buy them, the links will be down below. I get a percentage of those sales. It's just a wonderful way to help support the channel right now. So thank you. Moving on from that, we have a direct input bass that's just being plugged straight into the interface. We have 1 guitar mic'd with an SM57. Then we have 1 synth that's also direct input. We actually opened up the upright piano. That gave a bigger, more resonant sound, and I've seen them do that on Tiny Desk as well. A stereo pair of small diaphragm condensers. I'm using a pair of Lewitt 140 Airs. One of those condensers is pointed towards the bass keys, and one of those condensers is pointed towards the treble keys, giving us a wider stereo spread and a bigger, more detailed image of the piano. Now the piano player is also a backup singer, so we had him use an SM7B that we had lying around. Now those are all the individual mic'd instruments besides the lead vocal, and we have 2 room microphones. We used a Loughton Clarion as one room microphone and a Lewitt 640 Air as the other room microphone. Now I put one on the far corner of the room and I put the other one on the other corner of the room. We're trying to get as wide and as detailed of a room image as possible. And that leads us with our main lead microphone, which is kind of emulating the signature NPR Tiny Desk shotgun tone and technique. Now, as mentioned prior, that is a very expensive microphone that's actually recording 2 different inputs. One figure 8 input, meaning both sides of the shotgun, and then one input that's directly pointed the sound source or the singer. Now, because I doubt a lot of people have that much money to spend on a microphone, and the only cheap alternative that I found was like $800, and I didn't want to spend $800, I decided to go with a DIY sort of hack, which I think is more relatable anyways. We bought one shotgun microphone. I don't even know what this is. We bought an AKG C56 8B. This was literally a $250 microphone that I bought from the Brooklyn Guitar Center. It had apparently been in the warehouse in the back for months, completely forgotten about. It's not like a significant microphone, it's just what I had available to me, just like what you might have available to you. And then under that, I used an Austrian Audio OC818 in a figure 8 pattern, effectively using 2 different polar patterns from 2 different microphones in order to make a mid-side microphone. Now this worked pretty well, but there was some problems that I could have avoided that you can avoid now that I've made this mistake that we will address in the mixing stage. But before going to that, let's talk about how we routed all 13 of these inputs. I don't have a 13 input board. What we used was a Scarlett 18i20, which has 8 inputs. Then we combined that via an ADAT cable to my Universal Audio X8P. This gave us 16 total inputs. I like how random construction scenarios just spawn. Now you could in theory lace together a bunch of 2 input interfaces or however many inputs you might have using something called an aggregate device, if you're using a MacBook at least. It's a little bit finicky though, and sometimes interfaces don't like to talk to each other. So ADAT worked better for us in this situation. Shout out to Hoj for being an amazing drummer and tech engineer and knowing how to do that. All right, so now on to the mixing stage. Now as mentioned, we're working with Kali Audio in order to mix this project. We're using their IN5s, which were just a dream to work with in this scenario, specifically this scenario because they have 3 speakers rather than 1. This basically meant no harmonic distortion. It has an incredibly low self noise, and because their tweeter was in the mid-size speaker, the imaging of the high end and the mid-range was so scary accurate that whenever we were going to build this NPR sound, it was crazy accurate where things were on the stereo image, and you just don't get that with like a 2 speaker situation. And just an insanely neutral response, and that's really important for this mix specifically because we're going for neutrality. We're not going for a super colored tone. That's the key to the NPR sort of vibe. So on that note, we're only using a handful of EQs and a handful of compressors, and that's all that we're working with. Nothing to change or augment the sound from what you hear in the actual room. No reverb and definitely no modulation. Like, don't put a phaser or a chorus on a Tiny Desk performance. I only used 3 different kinds of EQs for this. The Ableton EQ8, the Waves Pultec emulation on the master, and then a Gullfoss Intelligent EQ on the master and on some of the instrument groups. In terms of compressors, I used the Ableton Glue compressor, an 1176 emulation from Universal Audio, and Universal Audio's LA2A emulation. And I used the LA2A specifically for the vocals. Now I really can't stress enough that the EQing needs to be subtractive here, meaning that we're taking away audio signals from like the kick or the room sound in order to emphasize other audio signals like the vocal or the piano or things like that. Up on the screen, you'll notice a bunch of EQs that I used for a number of different instruments. You'll notice that in all of these scenarios, there's almost always more cuts than there are boosts. And if there are boosts, they're not very specific. They may cover all of the upper mid range, but they're not boosting above like 3 or 4 decibels, whereas the cuts are a lot more extreme, and there's almost always a high pass on any instrument that's not low end specific or anything like that, so we don't get too much of a boomy room sound because of how much we're relying on the room tones in this mix.
I got some things to deal with, pretend like you can't see it, and I don't wanna burst down these roads. I got some things to deal with, pretend like you can't see it, and I don't wanna burst burst down these walls.
Remember, the key here is to rely really heavily on things like the room mics, to rely on things like that stereo MS setup that we have for the vocals, rather than relying so much on individually miking instruments. We're getting much more of a drum sound from the room than we are from the 3 drum microphones. The only time where the individually mic'd instruments are more prominent than the room mics are on things like the solos, on the piano solo and on the bass solo. There, we're automating up volume to bring out and accentuate certain parts. When you're approaching this mix too, it's also important to place the individual instruments where they are in the room rather than where you might traditionally put them in a mix. For example, the drums were to the left of our audience. The piano was to the right of our audience. The bass was kind of mid-left. So we're putting these things where you might see them in a live scenario rather than where you'd see them in a studio recording. And that's really all there is to the mix. It's pretty simple, but I do want to talk about some things that I would definitely do differently. Number one, and the thing that I just wish I would have thought of in the moment that I didn't, is placing the vocalist farther away from the drummer and having the drummer play just a little bit quieter, just because of how loud a drum kit can get. This is not Michael's fault. This is my fault for not listening to the mix and understanding where to place the drums dynamics wise. But another key part of that is, remember the vocal microphone that is kind of paramount to the sound and how it's picking up the sides of the vocal as much as it is the front of the vocal. One of the sides of that microphone was pointed directly at the drum kit. The result was we're honestly getting more of a drum sound from the vocal mic than we are the room mics or the drum mics. So if you're going after this sound, learn from my mistake and place the vocalist far away and off axis from the drum kit. Because on this setup, not only was the vocalist close to the drummer, they were also completely on axis to the kit. So we got so much drum kit in the vocal. So lesson learned, and you should learn from my mistake too. So with that said, here's Taylor Crawford and his band and our best interpretation of how to get the Tiny Desk sound at home.
Come on, y'all. Just saying.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Don't get lost in the heat of it. You might find you're better off alone. It's hot in here where it's comfortable, but you gotta get out of your comfort zone. Your comfort zone. Your comfort zone. It's about time I'll get honest with you. I'm stuck in a vicious cycle. Feeling shit is out of style. You can go your way, I won't follow. The grass looks greener there, but I need to tend to my own garden. It's not like I don't deserve this any more than you. If we go to heaven, we were never meant for heaven. Don't get lost in the heat of it. You might find you're better off alone. It's hot in here where it's comfortable, but you gotta get out of your comfort zone. It's about time I break it down for ya. I got some things to deal with. Pretend like you can't see it, and I don't wanna burst down these walls. There's a school loose, a crack in the wall where the sun breaks through. Now it's not like I don't deserve this any more than you. If we go to heaven, we were never meant for heaven. let's break it down. Some snaps. So we've decided lemon chicken is not the best chicken. So is fried chicken the best kind?
Teriyaki chicken.
Nah, teriyaki like you have to be in the mood, you know.
I'm good with those too.
I think fried is king. I think fried is like a good fried chicken. Oh, hey! It's not like I don't deserve this anymore than you. If we go to hell, then we were never meant for heaven. I'm running out of breath, let's keep going. This any follow. We're never meant for heaven.
Okay, so if we can do a 13 input full band, more inputs than they do at Tiny Desk, hopefully you're a little bit more inspired to do whatever setup you need at your house. Just understand the key is honesty, transparency, not getting too abstract and weird with the mix. Just try and show yourself in as plain as form as possible. And if you're submitting a competition, good luck. Bye-bye.